The distress beacon screamed across 70 star systems in less than an hour, carrying with it the final transmissions of 3 dying civilizations. The Galactic Council chamber filled within minutes as representatives from 42 species materialized through quantum links, their holographic forms flickering with urgency and barely concealed terror. The outer rim colonies were burning, and this time there would be no miraculous rescue. Ambassador Richard Hayes watched the chaos unfold from his seat in the human section, a modest platform that reflected humanity's status as the Council's newest and least influential members. Around him, elder species with histories spanning millions of years shouted over each other, proposing evacuation plans and surrender terms. The Felnari ambassador, her forearms gesturing wildly, demanded immediate withdrawal from all contested sectors. The Corthan delegation called for a vote to abandon the Rim entirely. Better to lose territory than face the Dravak Empire's unstoppable advance. The holographic display at the chamber's center showed the nightmare in real time. Dravak warships, each one a cathedral of destruction, systematically glassing colony worlds, their quantum disruption weapons phased through defensive shields as if they were nothing more than colored light. Every known defense had failed. The Felnari had thrown their entire home fleet at the Dravak 3 months ago and lost every ship. The Corthan Confederacy, proud warriors who had never surrendered in 10,000 years, had signed away 12 colony worlds just to stop the bleeding. Hayes leaned back in his chair and counted the seconds. Humanity had been part of this council for exactly 23 standard years. In that time, they had contributed medical supplies, agricultural technology, and trade agreements that benefited dozens of species. They had asked for nothing except the chance to be good neighbors. The galaxy thought it knew humans, peaceful merchants who brought coffee and music and those strange moving pictures they called films. Nobody had ever asked what humans did before they arrived. Nobody had thought to check. Admiral Patricia Stone materialized beside Hayes, her uniform crisp despite having traveled through 3 quantum jumps to get here. She carried a data tablet and wore the expression of someone who had already solved a problem everyone else thought was impossible. Hayes nodded once, the signal they had agreed upon. Stone stepped forward to the speaker's platform and waited for the chaos to die down. It took 4 minutes. When the elder species finally noticed her, their silence carried more pity than respect. "The human delegation wishes to offer assistance," Stone said, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. "We request access to all tactical data regarding the Dravak advance, including ship movements, weapon signatures, and communication intercepts." The Felnari ambassador made a sound that the translator rendered as sympathetic concern. Several other species exchanged glances that clearly said they thought humanity was marching toward noble but pointless sacrifice. The council granted her request immediately. There was no reason to refuse. Humans would see the data and understand they were facing an empire that had conquered 40 star systems in 90 days. They would realize their small contribution of trade vessels and hospital ships meant nothing against such overwhelming force. They would withdraw their offer and save themselves. It was what any sensible species would do. Stone studied the data for exactly 47 minutes while the council resumed its argument. Hayes watched her fingers dance across the tablet, analyzing patterns that had escaped military minds with centuries of experience. When she looked up, her eyes held something that made him remember why humanity had sent her specifically, before joining the diplomatic corps. Patricia Stone had been the youngest admiral in the history of the United Earth Navy. She had commanded fleets in combat scenarios that were still classified, and she had never lost an engagement. "We'll engage them at the Helios Junction," Stone announced, interrupting a heated debate about evacuation priorities. 72 hours from now, the human fleet will meet the Dravak main force and end this invasion." The chamber fell silent, then erupted in protests. The Helios Junction was a strategic chokepoint between 15 star systems. It was also where the Dravak were concentrating their largest battle group, over 300 capital ships supported by twice that many smaller vessels. Sending anyone to face them, there was not strategy but suicide. "How many ships can humanity commit?" the Corthan military advisor asked, his tone gentle, as if speaking to a child who did not understand the danger. Stone smiled, and Hayes saw several species flinch at the expression. Humans smiled when they were happy, but they also smiled when they were about to do something that required apologies later. Task Force 7 will be sufficient, Stone replied. 5 carrier groups, 20 battleship divisions, and appropriate support vessels will establish a defensive perimeter and wait for the Dravak to arrive. She manipulated her tablet and broadcast the human fleet composition to every screen in the chamber. The numbers made the translators glitch. Several species requested repeat transmissions, certain there had been an error in the quantum stream. The Felnari ambassador rose, all 4 arms pressed against her chest in a gesture of profound sorrow. "Humanity has been our friend," she said quietly. "We do not wish to see you destroyed by this enemy. Please reconsider this action. There is no shame in survival." Around the chamber, representatives from dozens of species nodded in agreement. They had grown fond of humans over the past 2 decades. These strange beings who laughed easily and cried at stories, and seemed to genuinely care about everyone they met. Hayes stood and walked to the speaker's platform, placing one hand on Stone's shoulder. "We appreciate your concern," he said, and meant it. "But we didn't want you to see this side of us. We hoped we'd never need to show you. The thing is, when you accepted our application to join this council, you became our family, and humans protect their family, no matter what it costs." Deep space sensors at the edge of human territory began detecting movement. Something massive was coming through subspace, tearing holes in reality with the sheer mass of its passage. The Council's monitoring stations struggled to process the data, their systems overwhelmed by readings that seemed impossible. Hundreds of quantum signatures, then thousands, all moving with perfect coordination toward a single destination, the Helios Junction, where humanity would either prove itself or die trying. And the galaxy was about to learn which one it would be. Every news network in the galaxy broadcast the same feed, a live stream from automated observation drones positioned around the Helios Junction. Refugee ships fleeing the outer rim colonies had stopped their escape to watch, crews gathering around view screens with the desperate hope of people who had already lost everything. The Dravak. Empire's Grand Admiral Thurk had hijacked communication channels across 12 sectors to deliver his message. His translated voice dripping with contempt as he listed every species his forces had crushed. "We have broken the Felnari Armada, scattered the Korthan legions, and claimed the territory of 37 lesser civilizations," Thurk announced, his image displayed on a billion screens simultaneously. "Now we will demonstrate what happens to those who dare resist the Dravak Empire. These humans, these newcomers who understand nothing of war, will serve as an example. Watch as we erase them from existence." Behind him, the visual feed showed his fleet, 317 capital ships, each one bristling with weapons that had proven unstoppable, quantum disruptors that phased through shields and tore molecular bonds apart at the subatomic level. The observation drones detected the anomaly first, subspace ruptures forming in a pattern that made no sense according to any known jump technology. Space itself seemed to tear open along geometric lines, perfect mathematical shapes that spoke of a civilization with mastery over dimensions the galaxy barely understood. Then the human fleet emerged, and every analyst watching realized their initial estimates had been catastrophically wrong. The carriers came first, massive vessels that dwarfed anything in the Council's historical archives, each one a mobile city carrying hundreds of smaller craft, their launch bays glowing with the power signatures of fighters and bombers waiting to deploy. Behind them, battleships arranged in formations that no tactical computer could predict, their hulls covered in weapon systems that defied classification, energy projectors, kinetic accelerators, and devices that made sensors scream warnings about exotic matter. Then the dreadnoughts appeared, 12 ships so enormous they generated measurable gravitational fields, their arrival causing ripples in local spacetime that would be detected by astronomers for years. The flagship, UHNS Indomitable, took position at the center of the formation, a leviathan of human engineering that carried more firepower than most species possessed in their entire navy. Admiral Stone's voice broadcast across all frequencies, calm and professional. as if she were announcing weather conditions rather than preparing for battle. Attention Dravak forces, you are in violation of Galactic Council sovereignty. Withdraw immediately or be removed. The message repeated 3 times before Thurk responded with weapons fire. Quantum disruptors lanced across the distance between fleets, beams of concentrated energy that had torn through every defense they encountered. The Council observers held their breath, waiting for human shields to fail like all the others. The beams struck human defensive barriers and simply stopped, absorbed by field generators operating on principles that made Dravak weapons look primitive. Stone's voice came through the channels again, and this time there was something dangerous in her tone. You studied our medical ships and trade vessels. You analyzed the civilian craft we sent to Council space. You never asked what our warships could do. That was your first mistake. The human fleet opened fire, and the sound of it echoed through quantum communication channels, kinetic rounds accelerating to relativistic speeds, energy weapons operating at frequencies that ionized the vacuum of space, each shot calculated by targeting computers that had been designed by a species that perfected warfare over millennia. Dravak ships tried to evade, their pilots executing maneuvers that had saved them in previous battles. Human weapons predicted every movement and adjusted mid-flight. Grand Admiral Thurk ordered his entire fleet to concentrate fire on the human flagship. 300 ships targeting the Indomitable simultaneously. Enough firepower to crack a moon. Stone didn't bother ordering evasive maneuvers. The Dreadnought's shields held against the onslaught while its weapons systems carved through Dravak formations with surgical precision. One capital ship exploded, its reactor breaching in a flash of plasma, then 3 more, then a dozen. The Dravak formations began to fragment as ships tried desperately to escape the killing zone. The Council military analysts watching through remote observation couldn't process what their instruments reported. Human targeting accuracy exceeded 99%. Their coordination suggested a level of training that took centuries to develop. Each ship covered firing lanes with mathematical perfection, adapting to Dravak movements in real time. A Korthan tactical officer ran probability simulations and discovered something terrifying. Humans were holding back. This wasn't their full strength, it was a demonstration. 30 minutes into the engagement, Thurk had lost 63 ships. Humanity had lost 0, not a single human vessel showed significant damage, their shields regenerating faster than Dravak weapons could drain them. The Grand Admiral broadcast a retreat order, his voice shaking with emotions the translator struggled to render: disbelief, rage, and underneath it all, fear. The Dravak Empire had built itself on conquest. They had never faced a species that didn't break under their assault. Human fighters deployed from the carriers, small craft that moved like schools of predatory fish, their pilots executing maneuvers that defied inertia, each fighter linked through combat networks that allowed them to operate as a single organism. They chased fleeing Dravak vessels, disabling engines with precise shots that left life support intact. Stone had given orders to minimize casualties, another fact that made Council observers realize how restrained humanity was being. Battle ended 42 minutes after it began. Dravak survivors fled at maximum speed, abandoning damaged ships and entire squadrons in their panic. Human forces held position at the junction, their weapons systems still fully charged, their formations perfect. Admiral Stone sent a message to the Council, brief and professional. The Helios junction is secure. We're establishing a defensive perimeter. No Dravak vessels will pass this point. Coordinate with us for colony relief operations. Across the galaxy, species that had considered themselves military powers watched the footage in stunned silence. The Felnari admiral who had lost her entire fleet to the Dravak replayed the battle feeds, counting the ways humans had made it look easy. A Korthan general analyzed human tactics and realized every move had been standard doctrine for them. This wasn't innovation. It was routine. Humanity had been doing this for so long they made genocide look like a training exercise. The refugee ships began turning around, heading back toward their home colonies with human vessels escorting them. People who had fled in terror now returned with hope. Children pressed against viewports to watch human fighters patrol overhead. And in the council chambers, representatives from 42 species asked themselves the same question. How had they so completely misunderstood what humans were? The emergency council session convened 8 hours after the Battle of Helios Junction, and for the first time in 3 centuries, every species sent their highest-ranking officials in person rather than through quantum projection. The chamber had never held this many physical bodies. Representatives who normally avoided the expense and danger of actual travel had decided this moment required their presence. They needed to look humans in the eye and understand what they had just witnessed. Ambassador Hayes and Admiral Stone stood at the center platform while 42 species watched in silence. The usual diplomatic pleasantries had been abandoned. Nobody wanted to waste time with formalities when the fundamental nature of galactic power had just shifted. The Felnari ambassador spoke first. Her 4 arms folded in a gesture that translated roughly to respectful confusion. "Where did you get this technology? How long have you possessed it? And why did you hide it from us?" Stone activated a holographic display showing Earth rotating slowly against a backdrop of stars. "We come from what you classify as a Class 12 death world," she began, and several species made sounds of disbelief. Class 12 worlds were considered unsurvivable, places where the environment itself tried to kill anything that evolved there. "Our planet has predators that hunt in coordinated packs, diseases that wiped out millions before we developed medicine. Weather systems that can level cities, and tectonic activity that reshapes continents." Hayes took over, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the chamber. "We didn't develop technology in laboratories surrounded by peace and plenty. We forged it while fighting for survival against nature, against disease, against each other. Every advancement came because if we didn't advance, we died. Before we joined this council, humanity spent 10,000 years at war with itself. Every weapon system you saw at Helios Junction was originally designed for human versus human combat." The holographic display shifted, showing images from human history, armies numbering millions clashing across continents, cities reduced to rubble by bombardments that lasted months, weapons capable of destroying entire populations deployed in conflicts over resources and ideology. The Corthan representative, a veteran of countless battles, watched the footage and made a sound that the translator couldn't parse, something between respect and horror. "We developed atomic weapons before we left our planet," Stone continued. "By the time we achieved spaceflight, humanity possessed enough nuclear armaments to render Earth uninhabitable 3 times over. We called it the Cold War, 2 human nations pointing planet-killing weapons at each other for decades. We chose not to fire, but the capability was there. Everything we built after that was constructed with the assumption that we might need to fight ourselves again." A junior diplomat from the Villari Collective asked the question that everyone was thinking. "When you applied for council membership, you presented yourselves as merchants and healers. Were you lying to us?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. Hayes met the diplomat's gaze without flinching. "Never lied," he said firmly. "Every medical advancement we shared was genuine. Every trade agreement was made in good faith. We contributed exactly what we said we would contribute. The only thing we didn't share was our military capability, and we had very good reasons for that decision." He manipulated the display, bringing up council historical records. "We studied your archives, learned about the Tarkinus Purge, the Velian genocide, the systematic cleansing of the Hratha species." The chamber grew colder. Those were dark chapters in council history. Civilizations that had been destroyed because they were deemed too aggressive, too dangerous. Species that had been eliminated preemptively because elder civilizations feared what they might become. Hayes let the silence stretch before continuing. "Humanity looked at that history and understood. If we arrived in council space broadcasting our military strength, you would have destroyed us. You would have called it mercy. Preventing a future threat before it materialized. So we made a choice," Stone added. "We would prove ourselves through peace, contribute to the council through science and medicine and culture. We hoped that if we demonstrated our commitment to cooperation, our history wouldn't matter. We wanted to be part of this community, not feared or isolated or destroyed. We wanted friends, not subjects or enemies." The Felnari ambassador's expression shifted to something that might have been guilt. What would you have done if we had rejected your membership application? Hayes answered without hesitation. We would have returned to our home system, sealed our borders, and hoped you never found us again. We would have spent the next 1,000 years building defenses and praying. We never needed to use them. A Corthan military commander stood, his scales shifting colors with agitation. You could have joined us as conquerors. Your fleet could have seized half the Council's territory before we organized a response. Why didn't you? Stone's response was immediate and absolute. Because conquest is easy, any species with weapons can take territory through force. Building something worth protecting is hard. You gave us something worth protecting when you accepted our application. That made you family. The discussion shifted to immediate concerns. Intelligence reports confirmed the Dravek Empire was consolidating forces for a massive counteroffensive. Estimates suggested they could field over 2,000 capital ships if they committed their entire military. Several species proposed surrendering the Outer Rim colonies to avoid total war. Others suggested negotiating territorial concessions. The mood was grim until Stone interrupted with 2 words. That's unnecessary. She brought up fleet deployment data, and the Council representatives leaned forward to read the numbers, then leaned back in shock. The force at Helios Junction was Task Force 7, one of 12 identical formations. Humanity maintains over 15,000 warships in active service, with production facilities capable of doubling that number within a standard year. We can field enough ships to engage every Dravek vessel simultaneously and maintain a 3-to-1 numerical advantage. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Species that had dominated galactic politics for millions of years tried to process the implications. A Velari analyst ran calculations and discovered that humanity had been producing warships at full capacity since before joining the Council. Their entire civilization had been on a military footing for decades. Every trade ship that visited Council space had returned with intelligence. Every diplomatic mission had gathered strategic data. Humanity hadn't joined the Council unprepared. They had joined with the capability to fight every species present and win. A young delegate from a minor species found courage to ask what nobody else would say aloud. "Why are you helping us?" Hayes smiled, the genuine expression of someone sharing a truth they held sacred. "Because 23 years ago, we sent a message asking to join your Council. You could have refused, you could have attacked. Instead, you said yes, you welcomed us. That made you family, and humans protect their family. It's what we do best." Around the chamber, representatives from species that had fought wars lasting millennia, that had conquered star systems and built empires, began to understand something profound. Humanity wasn't just powerful. They were loyal to the point of being dangerous. They had hidden their strength not from weakness but from hope. And now that hope had proven justified. They would use that strength to protect beings who had shown them kindness. 3 weeks after Helios Junction, human intelligence networks had accomplished what the Council thought impossible. They had penetrated Dravek Imperial space, mapped their military installations, and identified the location of every major fleet concentration. Admiral Stone stood before a joint task force briefing, representatives from 8 species sitting alongside human officers. The plan she presented made even experienced warriors nervous. "We're going to hit them everywhere at once," Stone explained, her fingers dancing across the tactical display. "While the Dravek consolidate their forces for an assault on human territory, we'll liberate their occupied colonies and strike strategic targets throughout their empire. They'll be forced to choose between attacking us or defending their own space. Either way, we win." A Corthan general nodded slowly, recognizing the strategy from his own military history. It was called strategic dispersion. Forcing an enemy to divide their strength until they were vulnerable everywhere. Inside Dravek Imperial Command, Emperor Ravik studied reports that made his blood run cold. The species he had dismissed as weak merchants had shattered his finest fleet. Now they were doing something even more disturbing, nothing. Human forces held the Helios Junction but made no aggressive moves. They simply waited, defended, and watched. His military advisors argued over what it meant. Some suggested the humans were regrouping after a costly victory. Others whispered that humanity was giving the Dravek a chance to surrender. Ravik refused to believe beings he considered inferior could threaten his empire. He ordered every available ship to assemble, over 3,000 vessels representing the full might of a civilization that had built itself on conquest. They would crush human space. In a single overwhelming assault, destroy their shipyards, glass their colonies, and remind the galaxy why the Dravak Empire was feared. His fleet began moving toward human territory, following routes that intelligence suggested would avoid defensive positions. What Ravik didn't know was that human intelligence had predicted this exact response. The routes his fleet traveled were seeded with automated weapons platforms disguised as asteroids, surveillance drones hidden in nebula clouds, and quantum sensors that tracked every ship movement. Stone watched the Dravak advance from the bridge of the Indomitable, a slight smile on her face. "They're committed," she said quietly. "Signal all task forces, begin liberation operations." Across Dravak space, 12 human strike groups appeared simultaneously, each one targeting a different occupied colony world. The operations were surgical, precise, designed to neutralize military targets while avoiding civilian casualties on a world called Verath Prime. Human Marines deployed from orbital carriers, their powered armor allowing them to move faster than Dravak soldiers could track. Garrison forces that had been terrorizing the local population surrendered within 30 minutes. The speed of human operations stunned everyone watching. Colonies that had been under Dravak occupation for months were liberated in hours. Human logistics ships arrived immediately behind combat forces, bringing food, medical supplies, and engineering teams to repair infrastructure. Freed colonists watched in disbelief as humans worked alongside them, treating everyone with respect regardless of species. Children who had hidden from Dravak soldiers cautiously approached human troops, offering flowers and crude drawings as thanks. Meanwhile, the Dravak main fleet walked into the trap Stone had prepared. They entered what they believed was the approach to human space through a region of dense asteroid fields and stellar debris. Human defensive platforms activated. Kinetic mines that had been lying dormant suddenly came alive. Weapons that had been disguised as space debris opened fire. The Dravak lost 200 ships before they even saw an enemy vessel. Then the human fleet appeared, but not Task Force 7. This time it was Task Forces 1 through 6, over 7,000 warships emerging from subspace in perfect formation. The Dravak fleet scattered, trying to find room to maneuver. In the cluttered space, human fighters deployed in waves, pilots executing attack runs with the casual precision of people who had trained for this their entire lives. Every move coordinated through combat networks that allowed thousands of craft to operate as a single entity. The Battle of the Nebula lasted 4 hours, and by the end of it, Dravak military power was broken. Survivors fled in every direction, their formations shattered, their command structure in chaos. Council observers watching from long-range sensors couldn't believe what they were seeing. The largest fleet engagement in galactic history had turned into a one-sided massacre, and humanity had done it while simultaneously conducting liberation operations across 63 colony worlds. Task Force 12 appeared above the Dravak homeworld. Admiral Stone broadcast to the surface, offering terms of surrender. Emperor Ravik refused, ordering his planetary defense grid to fire on the human ships. Stone gave a command. Human vessels disabled every weapons platform without destroying them, a display of precision that terrified more than raw firepower could. Defensive systems that had protected the Dravak capital for centuries went offline in minutes. Their crews unharmed but completely helpless. Stone repeated her offer, adding details about the liberation operations. Ravik raged about honor and glory while his military commanders watched their empire crumble in real time. Finally, a senior general named Ruth seized power in a bloodless coup, arresting the emperor and accepting human terms, complete withdrawal from occupied territories, reparations to victims, dismantling of offensive military capability, and acceptance of human oversight during the transition. The surrender was broadcast across the galaxy, a 3-century-old empire brought to its knees in 3 weeks. But what shocked the Council wasn't the speed of human victory. It was what came after. Human forces didn't occupy Dravak space. They offered to help rebuild. Engineers arrived to repair damaged infrastructure. Medical teams treated Dravak wounded. Diplomats worked with Ruth's new government to establish democratic reforms. Humanity showed they were as skilled at peace as they were at war. Council chambers received reports from liberation operations. Not a single human soldier had committed an atrocity. Their discipline was absolute. They had opportunities to take revenge for Dravak aggression but chose mercy instead. A military historian from the Korthan Confederacy made an observation that sent chills through the assembly. Humanity didn't reveal their full military power at Helios Junction. They revealed their restraint. Any species can destroy. It takes something special to show mercy when you have the power to annihilate. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, reviewing casualty reports. Humanity had lost 347 soldiers during the entire campaign. She knew every name, had reviewed every service record. Each loss weighed on her despite the millions they had saved. A junior officer approached hesitantly. "Admiral, the Council is calling this the most decisive military victory in galactic history." Stone didn't smile. "It's not a victory until everyone can go home safe. We didn't fight to win. We fought so others wouldn't have to fight at all." Across former Dravak space, human ships patrolled liberated colonies. Their presence a guarantee that occupation would never happen again. Species that had suffered under Dravak rule for generations finally slept without fear. And children who had never known peace played in streets protected by beings who had traveled light years to ensure their safety. 6 months after the Dravak surrender, the Galactic Council chambers underwent renovation, expanded to accommodate new security arrangements and the permanent presence of human military advisors. Ambassador Hayes stood before the full assembly as they prepared to vote on humanity's new role. The chamber held representatives from 42 species, and for the first time in Council history, the vote was unanimous before it was even called. Humanity would become the official peacekeeping force for the entire galactic community. The transformation was already visible throughout Council space. Human patrol groups moved through former conflict zones, their presence preventing old rivals from reigniting wars that had simmered for centuries. The Korthan and Felnari, species that had fought 3 separate wars over border disputes, now negotiated under human mediation. Trade routes that had been plagued by piracy for decades became the safest passages in the galaxy. Criminal organizations disbanded rather than face human military response. At the Galactic Tactical Academy, a revolution in military thinking was underway. Human officers taught classes to students from dozens of species, concepts that seemed obvious to humans, confused beings who had never encountered them. A Korthan cadet struggled with the idea of combined arms warfare. His species had always believed in overwhelming force applied to a single point. "But why coordinate different unit types?" he asked. "Wouldn't it be simpler to use only your strongest ships?" The human instructor smiled patiently. "Because the enemy gets a vote in how the battle goes. Flexibility wins wars, not just strength." The cultural exchange went deeper than military doctrine. Council scholars studying human history discovered something that troubled and fascinated them in equal measure. Humans had a complicated relationship with violence. They honored warriors but mourned war, built monuments to soldiers while writing poetry about the tragedy of combat. One researcher found a human phrase that seemed to capture this contradiction. "We study war so that we may have peace." It made no sense to species who saw military power as something to celebrate. A memorial service on Earth changed perspectives. Admiral Stone had insisted that Council representatives attend. They watched as humans gathered to honor soldiers who had died during the Dravak campaign. 347 names read aloud, each one followed by a moment of silence. Families wept openly, strangers embraced, and Stone herself spoke about the cost of victory. "We are good at war because we understand its price," she said. "Every name on this wall represents someone who will never go home, someone whose family will never be whole again. We don't fight because we enjoy it. We fight because sometimes it's the only way to protect what matters." The Felnari ambassador attended the ceremony and returned to Council space with a new understanding. Humans weren't naturally violent. They were naturally protective. Violence was a tool they had mastered because their world demanded it, but it was never their first choice. She shared this insight during a council session, and slowly, the galaxy's perception of humanity shifted from fear to respect. Former Dravak territories provided proof of human intentions. General Ruth, now the democratically elected leader of what was being called the New Dravak Republic, worked alongside human advisors to implement reforms. Young Dravak joined council military academies, training beside species they had once tried to conquer. An incident during training exercises became legendary. A Dravak cadet saved a human instructor during a reactor malfunction, risking his life for someone whose species had defeated his empire. The instructor survived, and the two became friends, proving that even enemies could find common ground. A closed council session addressed the question that everyone had been thinking but nobody wanted to voice aloud. Could humanity conquer the entire galaxy if they wanted to? Military analysts from 7 species presented their findings. The conclusion was unanimous and terrifying. Yes, probably within 2 standard years. Human production capacity, combined with their technological advantage and tactical superiority, meant they could overwhelm any opposition. The galaxy had no defense against a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting warfare. The follow-up question was more important. Why hadn't they? Ambassador Hayes provided the answer during an open forum. Conquest is easy, he said simply. Any species with weapons can take territory through force. Building something worth protecting is hard, creating relationships, fostering cooperation, ensuring that people feel safe and valued. That takes real strength. You gave us something precious when you accepted our council application. You gave us a place to belong. We'll protect that with everything we have. The new threat emerged without warning. Deep space monitoring stations detected anomalies at the edge of explored space, a species the galaxy had never encountered. The Krell swarm, a hive-mind civilization that consumed everything in its path. They had destroyed 3 minor civilizations before the Council even confirmed their existence. Preliminary engagements showed Krell technology was adaptive. They learned from every attack, evolved countermeasures mid-battle, and showed no interest in communication or negotiation. Panic spread through council chambers. Species that had just begun to feel safe faced a nightmare that seemed unstoppable. The Felnari representative asked the question everyone was thinking. Can humanity stop them? Admiral Stone studied the Krell data for 3 hours before responding. Yes, she said confidently. We fought adaptive enemies before, diseases that evolve resistance to medicine, artificial intelligence that learns from combat, even ourselves. The key isn't overwhelming force. It's overwhelming creativity. If they can adapt to our tactics, we simply don't repeat tactics. Task Force 13 deployed to intercept the Krell, their ships configured differently than any previous human fleet. Weapons systems designed specifically for this engagement. Tactics developed through simulation and analysis. Stone broadcast a message to the Council before jumping to combat. We'll handle this. Protect each other while we're gone. That's what families do. Across the galaxy, species that had once competed for resources and territory now stood united, not through fear of a common enemy but through genuine cooperation fostered by human protection. Observation platforms on a council station showed families from different worlds watching together as human ships departed. A Velari child asked her parent why humans fought for them. The parent's answer carried wisdom earned through hard experience. Because when we needed heroes, they chose to be heroes. Even though they never wanted to be, they wanted to be friends, but they'll be heroes if that's what we need. The UHNS Indomitable led the fleet into unknown space. Admiral Stone's final transmission reached every council world, brief and confident. We've got this. Stay safe, stay together, we'll be home soon. The galaxy didn't fall silent this time. It roared with unified support, sending messages of hope and gratitude to beings who had traveled across stars to ensure their safety. Humanity had revealed their true military power, but more importantly, they had revealed their character. And the galaxy was better for it.